Welcome back to the Extra Zone Arcade, and welcome to the third episode of the Mario 40th Anniversary Retrospective, a look back on the history of the world's most iconic series. In the last part, we talked about the Western Super Mario Bros. 2, where I determined that it's a fun game in a vacuum, but utterly fails as a sequel to the one that started it all. Not helping is the fact that I've never personally been a fan of the game. Since we're looking at another numbered entry, I figure I should hit up my criteria for what makes a good sequel. To reiterate, they are: expand on the gameplay and mechanics from previous titles, really refine what they set out to do and add more layers to set things apart, introduce something that could become a key feature or staple in the series moving forward. This could be a character, enemy or game mechanic that becomes iconic in and of itself, and clean up or remove features that didn't work or weren't well received. This one's not always so simple because you never want to throw out an idea, especially one that made the cut in the first place. Sometimes though, it may have to be done to make room for better and more refined features. Now, as a sequel to Super Mario Bros. 2, does Mario 3 succeed? No, it doesn't. In fact, it actually does slightly worse than its predecessor in this regard because it goes back to being more like the first. But looking at it as a sequel to Mario 1, how does this game stack up? Can we close out the NES era on a high note? Or does Super Mario Bros. 3 end up being another disappointing follow-up to that legendary introduction? It's time for the curtain to rise as we look back on the end of the beginning. Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka pretty much got straight to work on Mario 3 after Lost Levels' development wrapped. This means it was actually in development around the time Super Mario Bros. 2, or Super Mario USA, was in the works. They even released in the same month in 1988 in their respective regions of Japan and the US. Oh boy, 2 cakes! Except one of these cakes is a pristine, lovingly crafted work of art, and the other is the most painfully average chocolate cake that may or may not actually give you salmonella. After the success of The Legend of Zelda, which was also one of Miyamoto's wild creations, they thought of experimenting with a top-down perspective for this new Mario. Obviously, given the hardware limitations, it was pretty hard to make a platformer feel tangible in this style. So, they went back to the tried and tested formula of side-scrolling, and this time, it was going to feature all new levels. But that's not all. There would be an overworld map where you can select what levels to play, a variety of bosses, better graphics, and tons of new power-ups and more varied level aesthetics. This game was going to be the biggest and best Mario experience money could buy, and to make sure of that, the game had to be delayed by around 6 months. In total, the game was in development for around 2.5 years, which is practically nothing in today's landscape, but back then, that was unheard of. They really wanted this to feel fresh, responding to a common complaint that the Lost Levels was too similar to the OG. They also addressed the other most prominent complaint, that being that the difficulty was cranked up far too high, so they made sure this one was a little more approachable. The marketing campaign went crazy for this thing worldwide, and in the case of this ad, they took the worldwide part very literally. It was to the point where the game was fully unveiled to the West in a feature film called The Wizard. It's pretty much exactly what you'd expect in a road trip movie featuring a kid who's really good at video games from the late 80s. I won't cover the whole plot here, but once the kid gets to the tournament he's competing in, they reveal a yet-to-be-released Super Mario Bros. 3 as the final game that would determine the winner of the $50,000 cash prize. The movie wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was a pretty interesting ad campaign for Nintendo that probably did contribute to Mario 3's sales. It's one of those watch it with your friends over Discord while you're all dead tired and let the hilarity ensue kind of movies. Anyway, the game would release in North America just 2 months after the movie, with Europe and Australia following suit a year and a half later. As someone who typically likes things with the number 3 in them, how do I feel about Super Mario Bros. 3? Well, here goes. My Super Mario Bros. 3 experience began like it did for most Mario games of this era. I would browse through Flash games at school every Friday afternoon, since we'd get an hour at the end of the week to basically do whatever we want. This is how I discovered some sites that hosted classic game ROMs that you could play online, and thus how I played almost all the classic Mario series. Super Mario Bros. 3 was actually the first one I played like this, and was for sure the one I spent the most time with. Something about it always stuck out to me. All the cool power-ups, the amount of secrets the game had, and just how good it felt to play. It helps that out of all these early Mario games, this was probably the easiest, so young me didn't have a hard time getting into it whenever I could. Though I predominantly played the All-Stars version, which remastered this game and the other 3 games we've talked about so far in 16-bit. Out of all the games that did get this remaster treatment, 3 definitely got the best end of the bargain. It looks fantastic, even today. The colours pop so much and the remastered sound really does wonders for Koji Kondo's excellent and more varied compositions this time around. You know, I really haven't taken the time to talk about the music of Mario despite how iconic it is. So yeah, Koji Kondo is the main composer of the Super Mario series and has been since the first entry. Basically any catchy tune you can remember from these games was thanks to him. From the opening notes of the iconic overworld theme in Mario 1 to composing for the 2023 Mario movie, his legacy of work on the franchise will always be greatly respected. And his work on other series like Zelda is certainly enough to put him up there with the greats. Going back to my experience with Mario 3, this is a game I go back to pretty often. As in, it's one of those games where it's almost a yearly tradition for me to play through it. Of course, one of the notable times that happened was my Mariothon playthrough series from 2023. My first real foray into content creating. This is what I took from playing through it again.
But yeah, Super Mario Bros. 3, I still love this game. Like, this has to be one of the games I've played the most. Like, if I had to say how many playthroughs I've done of this game, it's probably something like over 30. So yeah, no, Super Mario Bros. 3 holds up amazingly after 35 years. The All-Stars version is great 30 years later. And yeah, play this game. Like, if you've never played this game somehow, there's so many ways to play it.
I maintain my opinion on this game pretty strongly, but how do I feel about it now? I mean, a lot can happen in almost 2 years, and maybe something happened to change my opinion. Immediately from the jump, you can see just how much they put into the presentation. The curtain rises to reveal the game's very stylistic logo, and a little scene plays out with Mario and Luigi, whose sprites and animations have seen a massive upgrade. I always loved this look for them, even down to the black overalls. As far as the story goes, the Mushroom Kingdom is experiencing times of peace, as an entrance to the Mushroom World opens. So yeah, I guess I just found out right now that this does not take place in the Mushroom Kingdom. Anyway, the Mushroom World is made up of 8 countries, 7 of which are ruled by a king each. That is, until Bowser and his Koopa army attack. This time, he has a new set of ruthless enforcers in the Koopalings, who steal the magic royal wands and use them to turn the kings into harmless creatures. When Mario and Luigi figure out something's up, they make their way through this world to restore the kings back to their humanoid form, crushing the Koopa menace along the way. But this was all just a ploy. It turns out that Bowser did this so he could sneak and kidnap Princess Toadstool Peach again while the brothers were running around. He sends them a note to inform them of his plan. And okay, why are the villains in this series so stupid? Sure, Mario and Luigi would have still figured out the princess was missing, but why the hell would you do this and still think your plan will work out? So with that, the brothers head to the Dark Lands where Bowser is situated, rescue Princess Peach and restore order to both the Mushroom World and Kingdom. So yeah, just your average Mario plot with a few extra steps, but peeling back the layers reveals something interesting here. You're probably already aware of this theory by now, but this game is set up a lot like a play. It starts with the curtain rising and ends with it falling, and various stage elements have a drop shadow as if put against a physical background. Some platforms even have visible bolts, much like a prop platform would have in a stage play. Mario and Luigi complete levels by going into a black void, almost as if exiting the stage. Although, isn't the whole thing that you're supposed to exit stage left and not right? Alright, well, it falls apart a bit there. But then at the end of the game, Peach says bye-bye, which would be weird to say to Mario, but makes more sense if she's talking to an audience. One that we can't see. This means the Mushroom World may not actually be a real location, but rather a dramatized version of the Mushroom Kingdom, made for a stage play that depicts Mario's adventures. Personally, I subscribe to this theory just because it paints everything in a much more interesting light. Like, who set this all up and why? More importantly, how much did they pay to get Bowser and the Koopalings on this? I know those guys couldn't have been cheap to cast. Moving away from theories and onto the gameplay, you can feel from the get-go just how much the controls have improved. Mario doesn't feel all weighty like the first 2 games, and he isn't nearly as unwieldy as Mario 2. They really got it just right this time. Picking up speed on the ground has a much more natural curve this time, and they've even added this P meter at the bottom to signify when you're running at top speed. This lets you clear much further jumps than you normally could, and maintaining P speed is always a lot of fun. You know, I too tend to run much faster when my P meter is full, so the game gets points for being realistic, even down to the sound effect. Just try and tell me that isn't the type of sound like someone's taking a leak. The jump feels so much better here too. Mario 1 felt really hefty with little to no aerial mobility, and then 2 cranked things up too high. This game once again hits the right balance. Mario does feel a little floatier here, but it makes platforming much more comfortable than before. It's just so much more responsive overall compared to Mario 2. Anytime I screwed something up in this one, I could fully accept it was on me. The level design has also seen some improvement. They're generally around the length of a Mario 1 level, with some even being shorter. This is because they're now more gimmick-based, as in each level has a unique element that it revolves almost entirely around. Take for instance this level, where you carry a Koopa shell up this cavern to break through to the end. Or this one, where you run through a field of Nipper plants on star power. Some of these gimmick levels are much better than others though. The most common of these is the brand new auto-scroller, and I think I speak for almost everyone when I say that these aren't any fun. Part of the fun of Mario is getting to go through levels at your own pace. You could either take the time to explore and uncover secrets, or blaze through them with pinpoint accuracy and layout memorization. Auto-scrollers don't let you do either of those things. They aren't necessarily bad levels, but they're easily the thing I look forward to the least. The airship stages, which are also a series staple introduced here, are all auto-scrollers, but there are a couple of these I actually find pretty fun. Namely the final one of the game in World 8, This stage is terrifying. The airships move at a ridiculously fast pace, there are rocky wrenches everywhere that'll catch you at just the wrong place and time, and there's almost no safe ground to stand on. Easily the game's hardest and most exhilarating level. It's not my favourite though. There's some pretty tough competition for that title this time around because the levels stand out from one another so much more. A positive effect of the more gimmicky design. 4-6 and 5-3 would have to be my first choices though. 4-6 was pretty much the original and better Tiny Huge Island, where you would switch between the hazards and enemies being small or supersized. World 4 was probably my favourite overall, but this level really highlights just how cool the giant sprites are. Then 5-3 is the famous Karibo shoe level, where you get to hop inside a green Goomba boot, allowing you to cross spiky hazards or stomp spiky enemies with ease. This is one of the only times in the series where you essentially have a level exclusive power up, and I kinda wish they'd do it more. Being able to enemy bounce off a bunch of spinies is super cathartic for some reason. I guess it's all that deep-seated trauma from the Lakitus in the lost levels. Right. So in terms of bad levels, I wouldn't really say there are any. There are a couple that are pretty uninteresting or don't leave much of an impression, but that's really the worst I can say about this game's lineup. I'd probably have to go with World 8's Fortress. It's a super long and maze-like level that I swear no matter how many times I've played, I still get lost to this day. Time overs are a rare thing to get in a Mario game, but this level is probably responsible for 99.99% of all the ones I've ever gotten. Still, not a bad level at all. It's just pretty tricky to navigate, which is what you'd expect from a late game stage. Though generally the game isn't super difficult. Barring Mario Land 2, this is by far the easiest of the classic 2D Mario games. The ease of control and generally much less demanding level design makes things more of a breeze this time. Hell, this and Land 2 are the only ones where you actually don't revert straight back to small Mario when hit, even with a secondary power-up equipped like the Fire Flower. It's not like this in the original Japanese version, but it is for the Western, and as far as I can tell, all subsequent releases. Let's talk a little bit more about those power-ups though. The Super Mushroom, Fire Flower, and Starman are back and work exactly like they did back in 1 and Lost Levels. Though when you've got Star Power, Mario now does this sick-ass flip. I mean, just look at him go. The real source is in the new stuff, and there's a lot of it. The star player here is the Super Leaf, which gives Mario a raccoon tail and ears. Build up your P-meter on the ground and leap up into the sky to take flight. Fun, satisfying, and really useful for most situations, especially with its ability to slowly glide down. Then you have the upgraded version in the Tanuki suit, which would go on to feature in other games, with Tanuki Mario even becoming his own playable character in Mario Kart 8. Dr. Mario being a different guy already trips me out, but this? There's no suspension of disbelief here. Putting on a fursuit does not make you a completely separate entity. Or maybe it does depending on who you ask, whatever. It functions the same as the Leaf, but also has the added ability of turning you into a completely invulnerable statue for a couple seconds. Pretty handy when you're in a jam. The P-Wing basically gives you the same power as the Super Leaf, but with the gift of infinite flight. Great for those really tricky stages full of pitfalls. The Frog Suit is probably the weakest of the new additions. It's practically useless out of water and can actually make some more platform-heavy stages way harder. But by god if it doesn't make water levels an absolute joke. Anything that gets me through those quicker is good in my book, and the vastly improved underwater control is a game changer. Love it in H2O, not a fan anywhere else. And then there's the Hammer Suit, my beloved. I don't think any other Mario power-up makes me feel nearly as much grief when I lose it as this one does. You can finally give those pesky Hammer Bros a run for their money, and not only that, but it decimates almost every enemy in the game. Thwomps? No problem. Ghosts don't die? Might want to rethink that line. Fire. You can kill fire. This may be the greatest Mario power-up of all time, top 3 at minimum. This game also introduced a world map, where you can choose what levels to go to, get items from toad houses, and play games for extra lives. You also get an inventory that lets you power up before you go into a level. There are even some items that can only be used on the map, like the cloud that lets you pass by an entire level, hammers that smash blockades, and the music box that puts map encounter enemies to sleep. Run into these guys while they're awake and you'll do a quick enemy room for another item. If you're playing all the way through the game, you'll end up with more than enough stuff to get you through, so don't hold out on using items. Alternatively, you could just go straight from the beginning to the end of the game, just like Super Mario Bros. But it's done a little differently this time. Instead of finding a warp zone in a level, you have to find a warp whistle. The first one can be obtained from World 1-3, by crouching on this white block near the end of the level for a few seconds, and then running behind the goal. Behind there's a hidden toad house where you can get it. Then, in the World 1 Fortress, fly up this wall near the first door to find a secret room and a chest containing the second warp whistle. Usually if you use one of these, you'll be sent to one of the first 7 worlds depending on what point in the game you use it. But using the second warp whistle when already in the warp zone is the only way to make it all the way to World 8. So, If you're speedrunning, this is obviously the optimal way to get through the game fast. Only problem is, since you've barely played the game before making it up to the hardest levels, you have no items to back you up. Make too many mistakes and you'll end up right back where you started, so make sure you know what you're doing first. Makes for a very interesting game of risk and reward, because you could play more levels before warping to grab up some items, but you lose time in doing so. Another thing you'd lose out on is getting to fight the main bosses of this game, the Koopalings. They're always at the helm of an airship, and will use their magic wands to put an end to your game. Larry Cooper is the first one you'll face, and he's the most simple to beat, only attacking by shooting at you and jumping around. Each of these guys retract into their shells for a bit before you deal damage, so you have to wait before dishing out the pain again. Morton Cooper Jr. is found in Desertland, and you fight him basically the same. Wendy O. Cooper is by far the hardest fight out of all of them. She can shoot up to 3 of these rings that fly around the stage, which can make jumping to hit her incredibly unsafe. Still though, 3 hits and she's history. Well, until she and the rest of these guys return in Super Mario World. Then we have Iggy Cooper, who fights the same as Larry and Morton. Roy Cooper is next, and he's probably my favourite of the group. He just has that cheesy 80s style of coolness with the shades, and usually his fights in this series are the more interesting ones. Here, he uses a ground pound attack to stun you, opening up an opportunity to land a magic blast. Lemmy Cooper flies over the caps of Iceland, no, not the British convenience store, and his fight is balls. Literally, he rolls around on a ball and shoots a couple smaller ones during the fight. These are harmless on their own, but can land you in a tight spot. Then finally, Ludwig von Cooper, who I think is supposed to be the eldest of these reptilian siblings, is the last one you fight in World 7. He does the same thing as Roy. These guys were a nice addition to the series, and finally shook up the formula of Bowser and fake Bowser we saw before. Even the way you fight them differs as the game goes on, which keeps things feeling fresh. Fortresses also have a boss of their own in Boom Boom. This guy is an absolute joke. He tries to run at you swinging his arms, but stomping him is made fairly easy since the rooms in which you fight him usually have platforms. After stomping him, he crouches down and his shell spikes protrude out, but then you can just hit him as soon as he gets up. In later variations, he'll either move a lot faster and more erratically, or sprout wings and fly. Most of the time though, you're not going to get to see this because he's just such a pushover. Once you make it through all his troops and traps, you face the Koopa King in the Dark Land Castle head on. Get him to Bowser bomb through these blocks and his reign over the Mushroom World has its curtain call. Or Mario can decide that with Bowser gone, he has nothing left to do in life and follows after him. Gruesome. Anyway, we save Peach and it's another job well done for the Super Mario Brothers. The credits roll and the curtain falls on Super Mario Bros. 3, as well as the NES Super Mario era. And what a journey it was! From the humble beginnings of World 1-1 all the way to the grand finale of the Battle in Darkland, Mario continued to get bigger and bigger. Super Mario Bros. 3 quickly became the 3rd best-selling NES game, only lagging behind Mario 1 and Duck Hunt, which were usually bundled together, at 80 million copies sold. This number is still absolutely nuts, especially for the time. The game was praised for being a massive improvement on the gameplay formula of the first, and generally having such a massive scope for the time. Never had a game with so much ambition, passion, and most of all fun been put out. And it's clear Nintendo really struck gold with this one. If this game proved anything, it's that Mario is absolutely here to stay. Even with a new generation being ushered in by the competition, I think it's safe to say that Super Mario Bros. 3 is still one of the best in the series. It's a game where the only inherent flaws just come down to its age. Sometimes there can be performance or technical issues, but it doesn't suffer from a lot of the other pitfalls from this period like unfair and punishing design. This game was truly ahead of its time in a lot of ways, and paved the way for the rest of the series. And maybe even gaming as a whole. Hell, it even got a show based off of it. That's how big of a deal it was. Super Mario Bros. 3 will forever be one of my favourite and most legendary games to ever release. In my opinion, it's the best NES game of all time, and it's not even remotely close. But as always, there's the Super Mario All-Stars version, which is also a great way to play. The best though would definitely have to be Super Mario Advance 4 Super Mario Bros. 3. What a dumb title. But it's a pretty great remaster that adds some new cutscenes and the ability to switch to playing as Luigi whenever you want. It also added a whole bunch of extra levels with the Game Boy Advance e-reader cards. The Switch Online port includes these for you to play, and they do get pretty insane. Some even include mechanics from the other games like vegetable throwing and Mario World's Cake Feather. I think that's super cool. Definitely check these out if you're itching for some more Mario 3.
新しい冒険が今始まろうとしている。愛よ、勇気を奮い立て。僕らはマリオと強くなる。テクニカルファンタジーゲーム「スーパーマリオブラザーズ3」。
So that concludes the third episode of the Mario 40th Anniversary Superspective. Tell me what you think of Super Mario Bros. 3. Do you think it deserves all the good press, or do you think it's maybe a little overrated? As always, I'd love to know what you think, so drop it in the comments. Remember to leave a like and subscribe on your way out, because that way, you won't miss when a new episode of this series drops. Check out the live channel and Twitch link below for some fun streams, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care folks, and I'll see you in Mario Land.